was in an infantry company in Germany back in 1989 to 1991. We used what is called a Bradley fighting vehicle. It weighs about 51,000 pounds and looks like a tank. We were doing live fire exercises at night, and we finished about 2 a.m. I was driving a Bradley in a convoy of about 10 other Bradleys, returning to the motor pool. The drivers used the large night vision scopes to see by. It's like watching green TV, and the Bradley commanders use that one that attaches to their helmets. While driving, a commander is to stand on his seat so that half of his body is outside of the vehicle, so that he'll have a better view of the surroundings. At about 3 a.m., I saw a man standing by the dirt road we were traveling on. I figured he was one of the German range patrolmen, and that he was just waiting for us to pass. Right after the Bradley in front of me passed, this man walked right out into the dust of that Bradley. I hit the brakes to avoid hitting him. At the exact moment, my commander said watch out, but it was already too late. I knew I must have hit him. I didn't even see him come out on either side. My commander then asked me if I'd seen a man walk out in front of us too. I said yes, and then he said that he had too. But when he turned around to check for a body, there wasn't one anywhere on the road. This dirt road was about 50 feet across, and when we returned to the motor pool, we took a flashlight and checked the whole front end and found nothing. No blood, no piece of clothing. There was nothing. My name is Heather, and I live in Omaha, Nebraska. I've only seen a few ghosts or spirits in my life. Sometimes I do get the chills though, like someone or something is nearby. The first spirit I saw was when I was younger, about 13 years. My mother told me to go into our basement to get some candles, which wasn't unusual. We spent a lot of time in the basement, playing slot cars and electric trains, and my dad has a workshop down there for models. As I fetched the candles, I felt watched. I scampered back upstairs, startled and panicked, and told myself not to be so silly. I give Mom the candles. I don't remember why she needed them, and felt the nagging, watching feeling again. I opened the basement door, and a round, green-white light was bobbing slowly up the steps, I think about 3 to 4 feet off of the ground. I grabbed my jacket and ran outside to my grandma's house down the hill. I never saw it again, whatever it was, and everyone laughed at me for it. But I remember it clearly. It was green and glowing with a soft white light. Mom laughed and said it must have been a glow-in-the-dark Halloween candy bucket from the size and color, but she couldn't explain how it was floating. My house is quite old, about 80 years, and nothing like this has ever happened again. We're the third family living there, and nothing violent ever goes on. I still get the odd feeling, but it's never been strong enough to make me panic again. The second spirit I saw really floored me. I was 14 and was riding my bike around town since it was a nice summer day, and I ended up on 2nd and 22 in Q, about 3 miles from my house. There's nothing there but cheap houses, and it's not a bad neighborhood, but it's not the richest in the world. But it's not a cheap, run-down area, just relaxed, second-hand. Nothing violent ever happened there before. It's become a run-down area now, and there was no graveyard or ancient Indian burial ground or anything that I or anyone else knows of. I wanted to go to Dairy Queen on 24th and Q, and I was behind it. As I came to 22nd, I saw a flat field where I knew there should be houses. It was filled with what I can now describe as short, rectangular tombstones. I saw a woman standing there, dressed all in browns and earth tones. I couldn't even see her face or hands. She had a headscarf on, and her hands were held in front of her, covered by her sleeves. I think she had on brown shoes, but I don't really remember her having feet or not. I'm inclined to think not. I asked her what this was, but she didn't answer. I turned back to the grays, which had vanished and replaced with the things that should have been there. Streets, houses, sidewalks, trees. I turned back to the lady, and she was gone. I had a very chilly, uneasy feeling, and a few dead leaves fluttered by. I rode away as fast as I could. I once saw a strange figure in the mirror, a girl my age, 13, but with dark brown hair, with thin bangs and braids past the bottom of the mirror frame. She just startled me, but caused me no harm. The last one I saw left me breathless and thrilled. I was staring out the window to our front window when I thought I saw something in the clouds. It couldn't have been lightning because it wasn't fast enough. It resembled very slow lightning. It was white and long and crooked. I got up and tried to stare out by the light. It was at a bad angle, so I stood up and walked to the front door. As I peered out the glass, I saw a flash of lightning and a giant pair of silvery white eyes, rimmed with blue, which then vanished in a flush. The outside of the window was covered with condensation, like breath, which smelled really sweet, like milk. I wiped it away. I've come to the conclusion that the first three were just random encounters, but the last one was a kind spirit, one that was looking in on me. I haven't seen anything so clearly after age 15, but sometimes I see holes in my vision, weird things. After rubbing my eyes and refocusing, they're gone. And sometimes I can hear odd noises and voices no one else can. I don't think I'm psychic or anything, but I do think I'm a little more sensitive than the people around me. I know, you may not believe this, but it happened. It's true. Thank you. I'm from a very small town in Madison Parish, Louisiana. One cold February night, my 5 sisters and I were going to visit my dad's brothers, as was a habit of ours to do, a couple of times during the week. My father had a work van in which the motor was encased on the inside of the van. Since it only had a driver's seat and a passenger seat, some of us had to sit on top of the motor case. This night, in particular, we took a different route to our uncle's home for some reason unknown. As we turned onto a side street, only one of my other sisters and I saw a woman with long flowing brown hair down to her waist in a long flowing white nightgown glide across the street about 1 or 2 blocks ahead of us. My sister and both looked at each other at the same time and said, "Did you see that?" 1 second she was to our left, and the next she was across the street and then just vanished. When we got home later that night, I told my mother what my sister and I had seen. She said that many, many years ago, I'm not sure if it was in the early 1900s, a young lady who lived in that area was to be married. On her wedding night, her fiancé was tragically killed before the wedding could take place. The bride, who was very much in love with her fiancé, pined away and died from the grief of her loss. My mother said that my sister and I were not the only ones who had seen this lady. I'll never forget the apparition that I saw that night, and I truly believe that what I saw was a ghost from the past. I suppose that every kid imagines a monster in a closet or under the bed at one time or another, and I had in fact began to believe my experience to be the result of a young fertile imagination. You see, my room was located in the basement of my parents' home. Located next to the basement stairs, my closet ran under the stair and had only an open doorway, no door. As I lay trying to sleep at night, I was sure I could discern a pair of glowing red eyes staring at me from the closet doorway. This always filled me with a sense of fear and trepidation. I could never quite make out the body of the apparition, more like having an idea of the shape and size, but never really seeing it.
I also had this strange feeling that the apparition indeed wished me ill. Furthermore, there was some force that restricted it to the closet. However, as I said, I'd begun to doubt the evidence of my own experience. Until years after I'd left the family home, my cousin came to stay with my mom and dad due to family difficulties. She stayed in my former room. Mom informed me that she was having trouble sleeping. However, she could not seem to get her to give any reason as to her apparent insomnia. My mother asked me to talk to her, fearing her difficulties stemmed from the problems in the family. She further believed that being closer in age might make it easier for her to open up. She described to me exactly the same manifestation I had imagined when I slept in that room. After a room change, she was once again able to sleep comfortably at night. My friend Christy is engaged to this guy named Sean. Sean has lived for most of his life at his parents' house in Cincinnati, Ohio. Sean's house is very old and just happens to be in a development that is situated over an old Indian burial ground. For as long as Sean can remember, there has been a ghost in the house. It imitates the voices of people who live in the house. There are many instances of Sean or his sisters being alone in the house and hearing one of their parents begging for help downstairs, only to go to the parent's aid and discover that the parent is not in the house. Sean even recorded it once while he was recording himself playing drums. In addition, there is a spirit that follows them and visitors around the house. It is a tall, dark figure wearing a hooded cloak. It has never harmed anyone, but merely made them feel uncomfortable. About a year ago, Christy made a trip out to Cincinnati to meet Sean's parents for the first time. He didn't want to tell her about the house because he didn't want to spook her. Sean's parents invited her to stay in the guest room, and Christy accepted. The first night of the visit, Christy was sound asleep when she woke up suddenly and felt something icy slide over her and felt like something was watching her. She got spooked and went over to Sean's room and slid into bed with him and stayed there for the rest of the night. Sean didn't tell her at the time, but the hooded figure followed her into the room. The same thing happened the next night, and Sean finally told her. She refused to stay in the house another night. When I was about 4 or 5, maybe even younger, I remember one night I was sleeping in my room and I awoke. I don't know why I did. I may have been dreaming. Anyways, I looked ahead of me to my wall and there was a face on it. It was blue, looked human, and this may sound strange, but I had a hat on that looked like one of those Arabian towels that they wrap their heads with. It spoke to me. I don't remember what it said, but oddly, I wasn't afraid of it. I don't remember the reaction, but I asked my mom if she remembered about when I told her there recently, and she said I used to tell her about a lady in blue visiting me quite often. I only remember telling her about my only experience once. I might have seen the face more than I remember. I don't think it was a dream, because I don't think I would remember a dream I had when I was 5 or younger. I'm 15 now, so it was at least 10 or more years ago. That's my experience. If anyone has had an experience similar to mine, please write me about it. I've only had one paranormal experience. It happened last October when my boyfriend had temporarily rented a trailer. We had lived there for almost 2 months and nothing out of the ordinary had happened. One afternoon, he decided to take a nap and I was in the living room watching TV. I started hearing this really strange continuous screeching noise. It sounded like it was coming from inside the wall, beside his bedroom door. When I walked over there, it stopped. I sat back down and started watching TV again, and it started back again. This time, I walked into the kitchen. The bedroom was right beside the kitchen, and I started opening the bottom cabinets, and once again, the screeching stopped. I never said anything about it to my boyfriend because I didn't think about it at the time. A couple of days later, we were in the kitchen eating breakfast, and he told me that the day before, when he was there by himself, that he had heard a weird, loud, screeching noise. He said he tried to find where it was coming from, and it would stop when he'd look. I told him that the same thing had happened to me while he was asleep a few days earlier. We both talked about ghosts and laughed about it, pretty much dismissing it as a joke. A few nights later, his mom came and stayed the whole night and was asleep on the living room couch. This particular night, we were sleeping in the bedroom on the opposite end of the trailer. It was really late, probably around 3 a.m., and we had been laying there talking when I started hearing this noise. It was kind of like the screeching, but much quieter, and screeched in intervals, like footsteps. I thought my boyfriend had dropped over the side of the bed, making that noise with his hand against the plastic on the mattress. I said, "Brian, quit making that noise." He said, "I'm not making that noise," and held up both of his hands. He looked at me as scared as I looked back at him, and he said, "Get up and get dressed." As soon as he said that, you could actually tell where the screeching was moving through the room to the corner beside the bed and feel this undiscernible presence, and all of a sudden, the screeching just went crazy and so loud. It was right there. Needless to say, within a split second, it was the only one there. Now you can imagine 2 grown adults running into the living room to wake up his mom. She said she hadn't heard anything, but that we had scared her to death, running through the living room at 3 a.m. in the morning like we were on fire. We sat up in the living room for the rest of the night and moved back to my mom's house within the week. So far, that's the only experience that I've had. I used to work at Clemens Unit, a medium security prison in Brazzarona, Texas. I started in 1999 and quickly heard of the past. There was an inmate cemetery across the street from Highway 36, which was the main drag through the town. Only markers remain, with numbers there, but I wanted to explain about while I was living next door to the grounds. A trailer park was there on the property line. Some cool foggy nights, as you would look through the tree lines towards the prison, you could see dark figures walking through the trees. On closer observation, you could notice them walking the fields. Host squad, as they called it. My wife was on the phone one night, talking to one of her friends, and freaked out over seeing these images. The next work shift, I explained what we experienced to one of the sergeants, and he said that a lot of death and bad things of the past all over the property was present. I really believe that now, because starting about late 2000, I noticed a lot more things happening at the prison. Okay, the history lesson of this place starts in 1890. An inmate was brutally murdered in the original building, which housed 6 40 to 63 man tanks. We never knew why he was killed, but the inmate started describing an older black man, an original in black and white striped shirt pants combo, walking around in the old stage area. Also, among the tanks, he would also be present during the 12 to 2 a.m. time. I personally saw him in the old kitchen area a few times, and also through the back hall area. He would just walk past me, smoking I think, and walking towards the outdoors. Sometimes, I would go with the inmate up to the upper tanks by the law library to the storage stage room, and always feel cold chills, warm spots, and even Gus, as we called him, walking around from one end of the stage to the other in 2002. I was called upon by some inmates as I worked the tanks that night to help an inmate in the toilet area. Come to find out that he was having a massive heart attack, and as my sergeant and I were helping him to get on the gurney, he literally died in my arms. After that, Gus came around a lot more frequently, even if Gus wasn't there. Things started to happen anyway. Black images floating around among inmates at night, the smell of rotting flesh in certain parts of tank number 3. It really got bad for a while. A lesson that can be taken away from this story is that if you want to work in a prison, be ready for haunts, ghosts, spirits, and other bumps and smells along the way. Barcelona County, Texas, is especially haunted because of its juicy past. If you like what you read in here, please visit the County of Ghosts in Texas. I know that your site already has the rave, located in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, listed as one of the buildings in your haunted places index, but I honestly believe that the building right next door to it should be listed too. The building is named the Sheridan, and it's one of those very old buildings that used to be a hotel. It feels as if you traveled back to the 1950s every time you entered it. There is even one of those elevators that is built something like a cage and has a wooden panel you have to slide back to get to. The apartments even have fuse boxes and those lock boxes in the kitchen cabinet that used to be used to store packages that were delivered from the mail carrier. Anyway, moving on with the subject, I just moved into this building like 2 weeks ago. I went into the rental office during my lunch break on a Monday morning and paid my security deposit for it and received my keys. The whole thing only took like a half an hour, and I still had a half an hour to waste for lunch, so I decided to go over and check out my new home. Usually, people do this before they pay for an apartment or home, but to be honest, I had to hurry up and move into a cheaper apartment. Money is tight, and I didn't care what apartment looked like, just as long as I could get a decrease in rent before it was too late. So, that being said, I just took the first apartment available. I walked into the building and went to the second floor, where my apartment was, and was about to put the key into the door, but I swear I began feeling very, very strange, standing at the door of this apartment. Thinking back on it, I feel kinda retarded, because I really had no reason to have any sense of foreboding, but it was there anyway. I mean, I stood there at the door with my key inside of the lock, but something kept telling me not to turn that key, and while I was standing there, I kept feeling eyes on me. I started to laugh at myself, but then I actually heard something, or maybe someone moving inside of the apartment. At this point, I didn't think anything was funny anymore. I just took my key out of the door and left the building. I still haven't moved in because I'm kinda nervous about going back there alone. I haven't even been back to visit the apartment without someone with me, but I know eventually I'll have to move into the apartment. I paid for it and signed a lease, god dang. I don't know, maybe I'm just really dumb right now, but I'm really convinced that something is not right with that apartment. I haven't said anything to anyone though, because I don't want them to think I'm a superstitious fool. Hi. I've never written about this, but when I was 16, I had an unbelievable event happen to me. Over my childhood years, I felt that I've been visited by deceased family members, especially right after they have passed on. I have had them touch my hair, visit me in dreams, and just feel them there. I've always been a light sleeper. Well, around 3 to 4 a.m. on a weeknight, when my entire family was asleep, I was awakened by a dark shadow standing in front of me. I was terrified and couldn't move. It was black, but somehow transparent. It kept looking at me, then quickly started to move back and forth, almost floating. It then ran up to me, then ran down the hall, and slammed the bathroom door shut. Maybe it had to go. Anyway, I finally had the courage to yell for my parents and had them look around the house. Even today, nearly 15 years later, I still have shadows following me upstairs every night. Another time, I was 6 months pregnant with my daughter. I was up late one night, crying very hard about a decision I had to make. I always prayed to myself at night. On that particular night, I said out loud, "Mom and Pop, if you can hear me, please show me a sign that you understand how I feel." At that moment, my blinds shot up on their own. I was shocked. That never happens. I never met my mother-in-law, whom I called out to, but I knew Pop. I just hoped they understood and agreed with the decision that I made. A few years back, my grandfather was dying of cancer. I was supposed to go and see him for the last time the very next day. I prayed for him and told God and Grandpa that it would be okay to leave and that I would understand. The next day, he was gone. I know in my heart of hearts that ghosts exist, some good and some bad, but I would like to think that they are there to reassure us and be there when we need them the most. Thanks for listening. I'm a 30-year-old male living in Fort McMurray, Alberta. I'm a manager of a rental company, and here's my story. On October 12, 2005, my nephew and I were playing video games on our Sony PlayStation. Meanwhile, my 18-year-old daughter was playing in our dining room area with her toys. Being tuned into the game, we were not paying too much attention to what she was doing. Suddenly, she would stop, come into the living room, and say, "It is scary, Daddy." Not thinking anything of it, we continued to play our game, and she went on playing. This then happened again, a second, then a third time. This time, I watched her to see what she was doing. She would run into the dining room area and say boo, then turn around into the living room area and say it's scary, then giggle. This happened about 6 or 7 times. We started to get a little freaked out, so I started to ask her what is scary, and she would reply it's scary every time I asked her. Getting nowhere, I then asked her to show me what was scary. She then led me and my nephew around the kitchen table, crouched down to the ground, and physically tried to pick something up from the floor. I asked her 3 more times to show me, and each time she would take me to the same spot and try to pick something up. We then moved to the living room to try and clear our heads to figure this out. Meanwhile, my daughter had gone into the dining room area again and started to look around the table to say boo and start giggling hard. This went on for about 15 minutes with her following something around the table, playing with it. Overall, this went on for about an hour and a half. Since then, about 2 or 3 days in the evenings, my daughter would have what I would call episodes of varying severity and length of her, seeing her playing with something in the apartment that always is in the kitchen or dining room area. Over the last 2 months, my daughter has been having more and more nightmares waking her up. I've noticed this since being aware that usually these episodes occur after waking up and after being up for 1 to 2 hours. I talked to a doctor about the nightmares, and he said it is very unusual for a child that young to experience nightmares causing her to wake up and stay awake. So, I'm wondering if it is the nightmares at all, or if it is something else keeping her up in the night, wanting to play. On October 1st, 2005, we moved out of the apartment, not due to related problems, but due to a nicer property becoming available. Last night, October 7th, 2005, I was in the apartment again with my nephew, trying to clean up and to get a few more things since we have until the end of the month. I was walking to the bedroom and glanced in the bathroom. As I was walking by, in the mirror, looking at me, I saw a young girl, 10 to 13 years old. I stopped in my tracks, looked for what seemed several seconds, got a very good look, and then she was gone. She had long, dirty blonde hair, but what was very strange was that there was gray hair mixed in with blood. She had very high cheekbones, a thin face with a narrow chin, and thin lips. Her eyes were large for her face, and the colored part of the eyes were black. I remember this the most because she was staring directly into my eyes. She was very thin and was wearing a faded summer dress with very large 5-petal flowers on it. Her skin was dark and gray and had what looked like age wrinkles on her face, but I could tell it was a young girl. She looked like she had been there for a very long time. At this point, I had kind of lost it and headed for the front door. My nephew asked what was going on, and I told him I was getting the fuck out of there. I calmed down and refused to let my fears take over. I mean, heck, she has been there for this long and has not hurt anyone. So, we finished what we were doing, and I started to load the truck. While I was downstairs, the nephew said it felt like someone was watching everything he was doing in this apartment. I, being a person that does not like horror films and do not watch them, cannot attribute this to my imagination because I've never seen anything like this in any movie or picture, and there's no doubt in my mind what I saw. At this point, my concern is this. I've heard that spirits can become attached to individuals and or material things. What can I try to do to try and prevent this from happening with my daughter or our belongings? Frankly, she can stay where she is for all I care. I read your personal story. It was spooky, but I enjoyed it. Thanks for having the courage to share it. I've also had some paranormal experiences, but considerably mild in comparison to yours. Please allow me to share them with you. The first possible experience occurred when I was very young. Under the age of 8 years old, I had an imaginary playmate, but my mother thought I was in touch with the entity. The playmate was adult, male, and went by the name Shadow. I don't remember Shadow, but I do remember the last time I talked about Shadow, because my mom asked me why I didn't mention Shadow anymore. Apparently I would talk about him at great length. I said that Shadow had gone away. My mom asked me when he would come back, but I said I didn't know. When my mom asked where Shadow had gone, again, I said I didn't know. My mom told me she used to hear me talking to Shadow, and that it sounded one half of a telephone conversation. It wasn't like I was making up the other half of the conversation, but merely responding to something that was being said to me. Perhaps I was in contact with the entity. However, Shadow never frightened me. He was a comforting presence. Perhaps it was an entity. Although I've wondered if I was in contact with my guardian angel. Then again, I've always had a strong imagination. Perhaps it was just an imaginary playmate. The next paranormal experience happened in my brother's home in Moss Beach, California, approximately 1/4 of a mile from the Moss Beach Distillery, a restaurant that has a reputation for being haunted. When this experience happened, I did not know about the hauntings of the restaurant or of the history of the area. My brother's house has a downstairs bedroom that has long been considered my bedroom because I always slept there and always with the door locked since everyone else slept upstairs. One night, I was awakened out of deep sleep by a man's voice, a voice much deeper than that of my brother's. The voice sounded angry, full of accusation, and said, "You don't belong here." I had a brief glimpse of a man in my room. His back was to the window, so he was in silhouette, but very solid looking. What I could see was a very craggy and rough-hewn looking face, and he was wearing a heavy canvas jacket, like the type firemen or fishermen wear. He was pointing down at me in the bed. However, it was just that brief glimpse, and then it was gone. I've wondered if I dreamt it, because I was able to go right back to sleep. However, I doubt I would have dreamt that I didn't belong there, because I had spent so much time in my brother's house that I felt I had as much right to be there as my own brother did. When I told my brother of the incident, he said he had something spooky happen also. One night, about 2 a.m., he was still up reading when he heard someone coming up the stairs. My brother built his house from scratch and was very familiar with the entire house. It wasn't one creak that he heard. He heard every stair being trod upon. Thinking he had a prowler, he got out a gun and went to find out who was in his house. He found nothing, and all the windows and doors were locked tight. He said it was very eerie. Later we found out that Moss Beach coastline, not too far from Half Moon Bay, was the site of a lot of illegal bootlegging activity during Prohibition. There were accidents, gunfights, and other tragedies that follow illegal activity. Since finding out about the history of the area, we have since wondered what it was that my brother and I encountered. The last paranormal experience that happened occurred within a 3-month period after my mother's death. Perhaps I should say experiences, because on 3 separate occasions, I heard knocking. I was living with my maternal grandmother in the house my mother grew up. Each time I heard the knocking, it was just 3 evenly spaced knocks, but they were loud. Third time it happened, I went to answer the front door, convinced that someone was there. My bedroom was in the back of the house, which was some distance from the front door, so the knocks had to be loud for me to have heard them. I'm not positive, but I think it was Mom coming back to say hi. There's another possible experience. Both my husband and I felt something pressing down on the bed while we slept. The first time it happened to me, it woke me up. I thought the cat had just jumped on the bed near my feet. When I realized the cat was next to my pillow, it got my attention, but again, I was not afraid. The cat often moves his head and eyes like he is watching something I can't see, and only in the bedroom. And when I'm in the apartment alone, taking a shower, I hear a man's footsteps coming into the bathroom. They always sound the same, and I'm guessing they are a man's footsteps because the stride is wider than a woman's and heavier. Like I said, my experiences are very mild in comparison to what you have experienced. I've never felt fear during the experiences, but later, contemplating the possibilities, I tended to spook myself. Pretty tame stuff, but every now and then, it grabs my attention. I haven't tried to talk to any entity, if indeed there is an entity, because I would rather the experiences remain merely an amusing conversation piece, and not the source of a major investigation. Thanks for letting me share my story. You have a terrific site. I hope to visit again. Hi, I just wanted to submit my story of some experiences we had in the house my daughter and I lived in from August 2001 to February of 2002. This house is located in Pendleton, Oregon. In July 2001, we lived in a small duplex that burned down, so my daughter and I lived in it for a short while. Then the hospital I worked for had a house that no one was living in, so we were able to rent it. This house had a complete upstairs, then another apartment downstairs. When we first moved in, we didn't notice anything at all. Then my dad moved in with us and lived in the downstairs apartment. First thing that happened was in the very early AM, like 4 AM. We could hear a baby crying from somewhere in the house, but the exact location could never be found. Then my dad, who was a true skeptic of the supernatural, actually admitted they had seen a young woman in a large brimmed red hat in the downstairs area. Both my daughter and I could hear people walking up and down the concrete steps that led to the downstairs apartment. Shortly before Christmas that year, I was laying in bed, mostly asleep, but aware of the house, and I heard very distinct footsteps coming up the back steps, walk through the kitchen, dining room, living room, and into my bedroom. I even heard the bags rustle at the end of my bed as they walked by. I stand straight up, thinking it was my dad coming upstairs to tell me something, and when I looked, there was no one there. I laid back down and heard the footsteps walk back out of my room, through the other 2 rooms, and back down the stairs. One of the most interesting things that happened was that my daughter loved to sing, and she was recording herself sing on a very simple old-fashioned tape recorder. She sang 3 songs. On the first one, everything was fine. Then on the second one, it started out in her voice. Then all of a sudden, it was a man's voice singing the song. Then that song got over. Then it went back into her voice. This was so scary, we couldn't believe it. Then right after the New Year, my dad became very ill and was admitted to the hospital for over a month. While he was gone, the haunting became even more noticeable. We would hear very loud noises coming from downstairs, and the TV would turn on and just blare. So, I completely locked up the downstairs so no one could come or go from any of the entrances. One night my daughter and I were watching TV, and all of a sudden, the TV downstairs came on so loud, it was shaking the upstairs. You could hear people walking around in circles in the kitchen, and you could hear voices of two men arguing and talking, coming from the downstairs. We ended up having to move, so I don't know if any haunting continues there or not. The house has since been sold, and new people live there now, and I've always wanted to ask them. Hello, my name is Laura. I've had a lot of experiences in my life. A lot of people say ghosts follow me, and especially my sister-in-law, who has been around me when things seem to happen. I would like to share two incidents in particular that scared my family and also myself. The first story starts when we moved into my grandmother's house. Everybody in my family said it was haunted, but I did not believe it. I visited there and spent the night there a lot, and nothing too strange has happened that could not be explained. It was the second night in the house, and I was giving my daughter a bath. She was taking her bath, and I was sitting on the sink, plucking my eyebrows, when all of a sudden, she turned to me and said, "Mommy, there are red eyes in here." I said, "What? Where, honey?" She turned to show me, and look on her face was that of sheer terror. I would never forget the fear in her face. She let out a piercing scream, and I was afraid. She was acting like someone was coming after her. I ran, grabbed her out of the tub, we slipped to the door, and I dove out of the room. My husband was dead asleep on the couch, but he flew up and went into the bathroom, swinging his arms. He thought someone had broken in or something. She was really freaking out. We were in the living room trying to calm her down. She was hysterical. All she kept saying was, "He's gonna get me. Don't let him get me." And we said, "Who?" And she said, "The man with the eyes." We let her know she was okay, and nobody was coming for her. We almost calmed her down, and as soon as we said we wouldn't let anyone get her, and that she was safe, the garbage flung across the room, and it was loud. That was the last incident that night. My cousin was sleeping over one night. She went home crying because I told her about the incident that happened, and she got a little vocal to the ghost, and a screwdriver flew off the fridge and hit her in the stomach. There were happenings like doors opening, water turning off, scratching at the doors, and on, and toys going off by themselves. Second story. We recently moved from Fort Lauderdale to St. Augustine. We actually moved to Lake Butler. We lived out in the middle of nowhere. One day, I was up watching TV. I had nothing to drink, and I do not do anything else. Anyway, I was watching TV and got distracted by something out the window. It looked like a green glowing circle. It was about the size of a golf ball, and the light was gleaming off of this thing. I was wondering to myself what in the world. All of a sudden, came another one, and then another. In like 2 seconds, there seemed to be at least 10, and it looked like they were trying to come through the window. I got scared and turned my head, thinking it would go away. As I turned my head, I looked at the door window, and a flash of heat lightning or some kind of flash lit up the window, and it looked like a man, almost transparent, but not quite. He seemed dark. I don't know. Anyway, it is hard to explain, but it got me so bad. My body hurts. I ran to the window, closed the blinds, and ran to bed, and forced myself to sleep. Things still happen a lot. My family and I just choose to ignore it. I hope you all don't think I'm crazy. Thank you for listening. There was another incident that has haunted me to this day. My husband 2 kids and myself, took a trip to Alaska last summer. We made it to the border of Canada somewhere around 8 in the evening. We were told that the nearest town was a place called Hope, about 30 miles up the road. When we got to the town, we found that there was no place to stay. It seems it was a national holiday. A kind woman at a local hotel phoned the next town up the road to see about vacancies. She reserved a room for us, and off we went. We reached the Yale Hotel around 10 o'clock and checked into our room. I turned on the TV for the kids, and they watched the Family Channel until we were ready for bed. We turned out the lights and went to sleep. Sometime later, the TV awakened me. It had turned on by itself. What was showing appeared to be a sitcom. What was being said was far from funny. It seemed as though the voice was dubbed. What was said did not even match the mouth movements. It was a man smiling and talking to his wife in a kitchen. What I heard was a man with a rough voice, screaming. My husband had woke up with me and asked why I had turned on the television. When I told him I didn't, he asked that I turn it off. I accidentally switched channels, and when I turned the knob back, the show was gone. It was called Just Snow. It's funny, it didn't really dawn on me until the following day how very strange it was. I've never before or since had a television turn on to what was the Family Channel and have it spew profanities at me, but I guess we all have firsts. In my last and final instance, my family and I moved into our house last October. My husband and I had been looking for houses for some time. When we found this house, we loved it from the start. It was a good warm feel, and it really was the best house we could ever have. Shortly after having moved in, my husband and I compared notes and admitted that we were both having strange feelings. Creepy was the word we agreed on. We were both finding the closet in our children's room open. The door would stay closed sometimes, and other times you return to find it ajar or fully opened. My husband shared with me that he was outside doing some digging on the French drain. He had set down a piece of chalk he had found. He turned around to pick it up, and it was gone. On another occasion, my family and I were sitting on the couch. My husband asked me to smell my son's hair, and it smelled intensely of perfume. Being that neither my husband nor myself wear any fragrance, we began looking around for something that may be carrying the scent. To refresh this memory, he sniffed my son's hair again and asked me to do the same. The smell was completely gone. The oddness seemed to subside for months. Then, this year, around the same time, it seems to have started again. The closet door is again not staying closed. We are having trouble finding things again. The other night, I felt a cold breeze coming across my face as though the windows were open, but they were closed. I go up to find the back door unlocked, knowing that I had locked it the night before. A few nights ago, when I closed my eyes, I heard someone saying to me it's all right. After looking up the site and looking at the pictures, I decided to try my hand at photographing the potential presence. I went into the bedroom that has the closet door that doesn't close. I said out loud, though I'm not comfortable with the idea of having a presence in my home, I think I could deal with it better if I knew whether or not you exist, and since I have children, and they would be able to see you if you exist, I feel I need to be aware of that fact. So, I'm going to take pictures of the house, and if you are comfortable having me take your picture, you can get in front of the camera. If you're not comfortable, I can respect that. I'm guessing you're a good entity, because my cat seems to like you. Note, my cat is very insistent on spending time in this room. I must say, I felt a little silly talking to the air, but it seemed the right thing to do. So, I took pictures of the house. I frankly was hoping that nothing would be found, and that I would find my imagination had run away with itself. When I got the pictures back, I found that the photos taken in the bedroom and in the closet have what I understood to be a vortex. Needless to say, I'm pretty spooked. I'm planning on finding out the history of the house to see if I can figure out who our roommate is. Also, I'm hoping to contact some people that are knowledgeable on the subject of ghosts. If this entity needs my assistance, I hope to help. If it just wants to hang out with us, that's fine too. And if it's bad news, I need to know. I'm hoping that my initial feeling of my house is correct, and that what I believe is a ghost is of the non-threatening variety. I just keep telling myself that. The ghost has been very polite for the last year, and those that should be able to sense the presence seem not to mind it. The cats and my 2 children, whose room the ghost seems to live and spend time in. Thank you for your time, and I'm glad that you were able to read my story. I grew up in a small town in central New Hampshire. When I was 18, one of my friends took me to a grave, which is located on the side of a road. The grave lies off the road, about 10 feet. The grave is that of a young boy named Miles Tyler, who died in 1811. He then told me about some of the experiences he had. I was a little skeptical of the stories. He had said that sometimes you will hear leaves and branches moving, and there is no wind. Also, branches will crack and break. He had also mentioned that if you left food out, it would end up unwrapped and partially or completely eaten, even unopened cans of soda. The next day, I was over to a friend's house and told him of the story, and he also admitted of hearing this and being true. So, we planned a trip up there with a group of friends. One of these people was a girl who was into the ghost and spirit thing at that time. She was into the Ouija board and seance stuff. We arrived there about 11 at night, so this way we wouldn't have any traffic or intrusions by passerbys. The girl and her friends started to try and communicate with the boy who was buried at the grave, while the rest of us watched intensely. There was one person there who was mocking the whole thing, and definitely was a complete non-believer and had no respect for the dead whatsoever. They had made contact with the boy within 2 or 3 minutes of trying. The spirits they were talking to was getting aggravated at the person who had been mocking him. I at that time didn't know what to believe. I just kept watching, my eyes glued on the ever-moving oracle. Soon, we all heard the leaves and limbs rustling in the woods around the grave. We all started to get nervous, while the person who had been mocking this whole event picked up his own pace. This just made things go completely out of control. Now, we could definitely hear the branches breaking, and it started to rain. Suddenly, the guy who had been mocking this whole event was staring at the headstone in complete fear. That's when we all noticed that it had moved. It had tilted to the left at least 2 to 3 inches. That's when we all decided to leave. Me and 2 of my friends jumped in my truck to leave. It wouldn't start. I tried for what seemed like forever, still scared out of my mind. I jumped out of the truck and told my friend to get in the driver's seat. I got out and started pushing the truck down the road. Within 50 feet, the truck started and the rain stopped. So did the wind. We left and never looked back. I haven't been back since. We all stayed up until daylight, and I dropped them off and went home. We were all shaking up by this, and we didn't even talk about that after. That morning, I told my mom what had happened. Funny thing is that she did not say that she didn't believe me, but just chose to say, "I hope you have learned your lesson and don't go back." I'm sorry for the lack of names, but didn't want to involve anyone without their permission. I now live out of state and have lost track of most of them. One summer, when I was about 11 or 12 years old, my parents, my little sister, 2 of my older sisters, and myself moved into this old gray house in northern Indiana. It had a cement sidewalk that went around to the back of the house, and at the back of the door, there was a date and 2 footprints and a handprint. The date was about 1812, if I remember correctly. It has been at least 10 years since this has happened. Anyway, right before we moved in, my 2 older sisters wanted to stay the night at the house, so they did. They felt real uneasy after being there for a while. They sat on the floor, back to back, wishing they hadn't done this. All of a sudden, they heard a loud banging noise coming from the basement.
They called the police from the neighbor's house. After the police checked everything out and found nothing, they left. Once again, my sisters, still scared out of their minds, sat on the floor. They heard it again. So once again, they called the police. They showed up and stuck around a while to see if maybe they could hear it. About 15 minutes or so later, they heard it. One of the police officers told them that it was just an old furnace in the basement making noises. My sisters had a good laugh and finally drifted off to sleep. When we finally moved in and settled down, I wanted to really check the place out. In my room there was a walk-in closet, about 12 feet in length, and on the left side inside the door was a smaller door that we assumed led to the attic. I felt very odd every time I had to go to the closet. One night, my little sister decided that she was going to sleep in my bed with me. Of course, being the brave sister I was, I picked up my little book of ghost stories and began to read a story entitled Phone Calls from a Ghost. All of a sudden, the light in the hallway began to flicker. It was the light we were using to read the book by. We got scared and I threw the book out my bedroom door. We laid there talking, wondering what caused that to happen, when we began to hear music and lots of voices coming from the attic. I could hear a child running around and laughing also, but my sister says she didn't hear that. We decided to go downstairs and sleep in her room that night. A few weeks go by, and one of my older sisters bought a Ouija board. My mom didn't like the idea of it being in her house because her mother always told her that they were of the devil. But, being a little curious herself, we all sat down and watched as my mother and older sister began to play the game. The spirit in the board said his name was Ghoul. I'm not sure how it would be pronounced, but I remember how it was spelled. We asked it some silly questions, and then my mom asked it a more serious question about if one of us was going to die, when, and how. The board told her something. She wouldn't tell us. Then she got really mad at the spirit and began calling it names. The little device that you put your hands on began moving around the board really fast in a figure-8 pattern no one was touching. Then it flew off the board and sailed across the front room into the dining room. My mom told my sister to get out of her house and never mention anything about what had happened. But she didn't take it out. She just put it in the closet in my room. One night, me and my little sister decided that we were going to be gypsies. So, we got our crystal ball, which was nothing more than an electric candle with a blue bulb, and sat in the playroom and turned off all the lights. My mom was the only one home, and she was downstairs. We sat next to the candle and began chanting, "Oh spirits, if you are here, give us a sign. We want to know who you really are and why you're here." Over and over we chanted. Just then, I felt this cold chill. The windows were closed and it was midsummer. The bulb in the candle flashed and then went out, and I heard someone whisper, "I'm here." It sounded like a child's voice. Then, the hall light flashed twice and then stayed on for about 5 or 10 seconds and went out. My sister and I ran down the stairs, across the dining room, and into the front room to where my mother was sitting, reading a book. We asked her if she flashed the lights just now, and she said no. See, my mom can't walk very well. She can't run or walk fast either, so she wouldn't have been able to get to the stairwell, flash the lights, and get back to her seat in time before we made it down the stairs. She didn't even notice the lights flash. Needless to say, we didn't go back upstairs. The next weekend, I stayed with my friend Robin. I didn't see anything about what was going on in our house. My mom and little sister were home alone. During the night, my sister woke up because she heard a woman scream. She ran to my mom's room and woke her up and told her. Mom called the police. They showed up, checked everything out. Nothing. After my mom got her calmed down and they both fell asleep, my sister heard the screaming again. So, once again, Mom called the police. They still didn't find anything. I wanted to find out why all this crazy stuff was happening, so I began to ask around.
A few of the neighborhood kids got together and helped me find out. Of course, they thought my sister and I were crazy. Then my friend Erin talked to a lady at the library. She told Erin what happened, and then Erin came home to my home to tell me. We were standing outside the house, on the side where my room is below the window, in my walk-in closet. She told me that there was a mom, dad, and child who lived here a long time ago. One evening after school, the little boy was up in his room, which was the same room I had at the time. The mom was standing in the hallway talking to him when the dad came home. He was drunk and told him to come down. She looked at the boy and told him not to come down. He could hear his mom and dad yelling, and then all of a sudden, he heard his mom scream, and she just kept screaming. He ran down the stairs and into the kitchen. There was blood everywhere, and his dad was still stabbing her in the chest and stomach. He turned to the boy, and he said, "You're next." He ran up the stairs and locked himself in the attic. The dad took the mother's body and went down to the basement. In the basement, there was a little cubbyhole in the wall. Inside that hole was another hole. He put her in the second cubbyhole and went after the boy. He kicked the attic door open, and when he found the boy, he began stabbing him, little at a time, just enough to make him bleed a little bit. The neighbor heard the boy's screams and called the police. The dad took the boy, still screaming, and went down to the basement and climbed into the second little cubbyhole and finished killing the boy. He then took his own life. After Erin finished telling me the story, I looked up at my window, and it was like I was looking at a family photo. I could see the mom, dad, and boy looking down at me. She was wearing a whitish sweater. The dad was wearing overalls and a plaid shirt, and the boy was wearing a pair of overalls and a plain t-shirt. They looked happy. Then I looked at Erin, who didn't seem to notice them, and then I looked back, and they were gone. After everyone went home, and I could sit and tell my mom about it, who didn't believe me anyway, I began putting things together. The child's voice in the attic, the woman screaming, the banging in the basement. I know it could have been of the furnace. It was the middle of summer, and there wasn't a need for a furnace to be on, so it wasn't in use. I still had the visits from the family, but nothing as bad or as horrible as what they went through when they were alive. I want to start off by saying that this is a great site, and I love reading about everyone's ghostly experiences, even though I must admit I have a hard time believing them all. There's some stories that you can just tell the person writing it is a kid with an overactive imagination. I only say this because even though I am a believer, I am a college educational rational individual, and I can also be the biggest skeptic you've ever met, which brings me to this incident that occurred while I was still in college. I just want to stress to everyone that's as skeptical as I am, that even though this experience sounds extremely unbelievable, that this is true and it really did happen. I know that this is long, but bear with me. I want to make sure I didn't leave anything out. This experience happened one late night in October in 1994. I was a junior in college at the time and had very little free time to do anything because besides class, I also worked part-time and was very active in my fraternity. Every year, we would have a big Halloween party at one of our fraternity brothers' houses and just have a completely wild, chaotic night, but nothing can compare to what we all experienced that night. I got to the party shortly after it started, got a beer, and noticed people coming out of the basement. I asked one of the people what was going on down there, and they told me that my friend Jeff had brought his Ouija board to the party and was down there, acting stupid. Apparently, these people didn't know Jeff very well. He took the Ouija very seriously. If anything, he was addicted to it. He constantly used it and kept people in close contact with a spirit named Jack that he contacted through the board. I'd come to learn that Jack wasn't the most pleasant spirit and was a pretty mean individual who had died in prison, but for some reason, Jeff liked conversing with him. I then proceeded down the stairs to see what was going on. There was about 10 people down in the basement. By the way, this was not a finished basement.
This was the spooky concrete floors and dust everywhere basement. Jeff and a girl I knew named Lynn were using the board and talking to Jeff. Lynn began getting tired of it. She was just trying to have a good time, and she thought that Jeff was taking the whole thing way too seriously. Before she could get up to go back upstairs, a girl we knew named Dana came down the stairs. As soon as Dana came down into the basement, the board went absolutely nuts, moving around at a frenzied pace. Jeff said that this wasn't like Jack and asked the board what was wrong. The board spelled out that it wasn't Jack, and it just kept spelling Dana's name over and over. Jeff asked the board if the spirit knew Dana, and it said yes. At this point, everyone's kind of looking around confused and everything, and Dana was just looking at the board all weird. Jeff then asked the board what its name was, as it spelled out the name Michael, and that he was 6 years old when he died. This is when Dana went ballistic. She just started crying uncontrollably and shouting, but we couldn't understand her because she was crying so much. She then ran upstairs and out the back door. A couple of us followed her to try and find out what was going on and to try and calm her down. We went outside and saw Dana crying on another girl's shoulder. This other girl looked both pissed off and scared to death at the same time. We asked her what was wrong and started yelling at us. How could you dare pull a mean trick like that? You should feel awful for doing this to her. We were clueless. We asked her what she was talking about, and then she told us that Dana had a younger brother named Michael that drowned when he was 6 years old. A chill immediately went down my spine. Once Dana calmed down a little bit, she told us that she'd been trying to contact Michael over the years, but was never able to. She then offered to buy Jeff's Ouija board from him so he could keep in touch with her brother. At this time, Jack came back, and it was like he and Michael were fighting over control of the board. Jack then told Jeff that if he burned the board that night before midnight, that his soul would be set free and he would be at peace. Jeff immediately wanted to set the board on fire because he said he developed some sort of relationship with Jack and wanted his soul to be at peace. Let's just say Dana didn't like that idea a bit, so they both got into huge arguments and the party became totally chaotic. By this time, everyone at the party, only about 50 people, knew what was going on, and everyone started fighting and yelling, split down the middle, either on Jeff's side or Dana's. Eventually, Jeff snuck outside with a can of lighter fluid and set the board on fire, with Dana standing over it and crying her eyes out. As you can guess, no one was really in the mood to party after that, and everyone ended up either staying at the house the party was at or left for home to get their head back together. After that night, not one person I know that was at this party ever talked about that night again, not even once. I don't know how to explain what happened, but all I know is that there's no way that this was some sort of trick or joke that Jeff and Dana could have played on us. Being the skeptic that I am, to this day, I tried to find out just how they could have pulled this over on us. Dana was just a friend of a friend of a friend that not very many of us knew that well, and that night at the party, none of us knew that she had a brother. Just that one friend of hers at a party that yelled at us knew anything about it. And then there's Jeff. He just takes the occult way too seriously and would never use it as a basis for a joke, and if it was a trick, he's not the type to let it go. He'd make sure he knew it in our face about how much he scared us and what a great joke it was every chance he got. That's just how he is. To this day, anytime I tell anyone about this, when I get to the part that the spirit was her brother, I get a chill all over my body. Words simply can't describe what it is like being that night and what happened, but I'll never forget about it. I can remember it was just like it was yesterday. If anyone wants to write me about this or anything, feel free to.
Hey Phantoms, and welcome to the end of the video. You know, the end of the video in, what is it now, August, almost September 2024. Remember, you have the potential to upload a video. Well, I do. I don't know what I'm saying, guys. But really, I hope you really enjoyed the video. I've spent a lot of time and effort just to get this video out.
So I hope you can like this, share it, and leave a comment. There's going to be a really long video soon, Wednesday as usual, but like, yeah, I really appreciate your patience with me as you wait to actually get this video out. I don't even know what I'm talking about anymore, but I'm not going to edit it out. But you guys know what I meant. I'm mixing up my words because apparently I don't know how to talk in front of people or in front of 37,000. Anyway, guys, love you so much, and I'll see you in the next video.